Welcome, everybody. Welcome to TDC Virtual Salons. I'm Paul Carlos, president of the TDC. Joining us is Carol Waller, our executive director, and Ann Quito and Walter Bernard. But first, I have a few announcements. If I can get my PDF going here. So a lot of the TDC's work is contributing to scholarships for students. So if you want to donate, please do so on our TDC website. And obviously a lot of our programming and activities wouldn't be possible without TDC membership. So please join the TDC and be part of our type community. And I want to welcome Ann Quito and Walter Bernard, and they're going to talk about how Ann helped write Mag Men with Walter Bernard and Milton Glaser. But first, a little bit of introduction of who Ann and Walter are in case you don't know who they are. Ann is a staff reporter at Quartz, where she writes about design through the lens of politics and business news. She is the recipient of the inaugural Stephen Heller Prize for Cultural Commentary. She wrote Mag Men, 50 Years of Making Magazines in 2019. And Ann is a graduate of Georgetown University with a master's degree in visual culture and is an alumni of the School of Visual Arts Design Criticism MFA program. And then Walter has had a long distinguished design career. He was art director of New York Magazine, which is what part of the book is about. In 1977, his redesign of Time Magazine brought innovative information graphics, illustration, and graphic design to the News Weekly. Other credits include the redesign of the Atlantic Monthly, Fortune Magazine, and Adweek. And in 1983, he formed WBMG. The MG stands for Milton Glaser, and together they designed over 100 magazines and newspapers throughout the world. And he also designed the title sequences for Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail for Nora Ephron. So welcome, Ann and Walter. Also just a note, our TDC virtual salons are free for members. If you want to donate money to get into our salons, please donate some money. And also, you can also pay the non-member fee of $10. So thank you. Take it away, Ann. I'm gonna stop
Thanks,
sharing
Paul.
my screen.
I want to share my screen. Okay. Hang on. Hi, everybody. I love seeing all the hellos from all over. And thank you for the fellow insomniacs, I think dialing in from Asia. So wonderful. So it's a thrill to be invited to speak at the Type Directors Club today. Among the species of designers I've met, typographers and type designers are the most vigilant and appreciative of detail. As creators and custodians of letter forms or fonts, the basic unit of culture, you often do the invisible work. They're often tedious to make sure things just look just right. The same obsessiveness, I'll tell you, this dogged approach to fact-checking carried through the making of the book, Mag Men. Attentive readers who parse through its captions, footnotes, and end papers will find many delights and Easter eggs, maybe even some jokes in this volume. Mag Men 50 Years of Making Magazine may look like a coffee table book, but to me, it's more of a historical document. So we had to get things right. Producing the book with Columbia University Press meant encoding an unwritten history from the lens of graphic designers. Compared to writers and journalists, it's rarer to hear directly from the people who conceptualize and assemble magazines. That's a shame, because especially legends like Milton Glaser and Walter Bernard have the juiciest and most vivid recollections of the newsroom, of how things actually came together. Remember, this book covers a time before there were computers. So there were no computers, lots of adventure, lots of logistics, lots of glue, lots of cell tack, X-Acto knives, and the works. So the most common question I get about Magman is, so how'd you get this gig? Well, this is my first book, and I'm a relatively new writer, I guess. So it might delight my fellow type nerds listening in that my book writing adventure began with 9 letter forms. Art is Work in Tobias Frere Jones's Poynter Old Style, to be exact, is the title of Milton Glaser's last monogram, and the marquee, or the battle cry, the incantation above his office building in 207 East 32nd Street. Upon the recommendation of Steve Heller, I showed up, I think fall of 2018, to meet Walter. A bit about Art is Work. Art is Work is Milton's way of erasing the border between esoteric, fancy art making to basically our daily grind. To him, they were one and the same. A short order cook making a perfect pastrami sandwich was art making, he would often say. So, like you, maybe some of you, for weeks, I couldn't believe I got this gig. So I revealed to Walter recently that for a long time, I would take a picture of the door before I got in as kind of like a receipt for the day to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Here's Walter and Milton in front of this door. This 4-story Beaux-Arts building is an official landmark, or a secular altar maybe, for graphic design fans all over the world. Pass by on any day and you'll see selfie takers sort of just posing with this door. It was once the offices of Pushpin Studios, and where many magazines, including New York Magazine, was born. So by the time I got a call to work on Magman, I had been a news journalist for about 4 years. I had about, 700 bylined articles, but I realized Walter did not Google this. So I guess it was sort of like, hi, I walked in the door and we sort of have this nice conversation. He suggested instead, to know if maybe I could write a sentence, an exercise, which to me read an audition. And what was it? Well, it's simple. It's to take Tom Wolfe's 25,000 word essay, Radical Chic, and encapsulate it in maybe like 200, 250 words, he said. I learned that Milton had been mulling this book for a while, and not only did they have a full concept, but they already pretty much had the layout done. Thankfully, I passed this test. So for about 9-10 months, this is the daily schedule. I would interview Walter and Milton in the morning. The book Walter is holding is basically a mock-up, a flexible mock-up of the entire book. I would interview them in the morning, fact check their memory, kind of like look at some sources, and then write a draft in their words. A note about tone. So earlier on, we had all decided that maybe this book should be written in first person, like a testimony, instead of sort of narrative descriptions. This meant, as a writer, for me, shifting from my usual just the facts, ma'am, third person journalism to kind of script writing, right? So how do I write in the voices of these two men? And in writing it, to me, I thought of Walter and Milton as two poets of a different genre. Milton, lyrical, whimsical, philosophical, humorous, erudite. Walter, factual, concise, direct, insightful, like a haiku, or really the qualities of a great art director. I remember I would often submit drafts and Milton would say, okay, perfect, fine. He would sometimes add an intensifier. And the only direction I got from Walter was this: you can write anything you want, just don't use your big words, he would say. I guess I was prone to that. A primary resource was this incredible trove of back issues. So I wrote the book in their offices. I camped out on Walter's table on the third floor where New York Magazine staffers once worked, maybe smelled glue and sort of like tripped over papers. And his office is really a magazine design lover's paradise, or maybe an archivist's dream. Imagine rows and rows of back issues, design books, type specimen books, sort of perfectly preserved in cabinets. You could smell history from the walls. In Milton's basement, there were comps, contracts, paperwork, fodder for stories beyond 300 words. Part of this daily delight was really working with two graphic designers who worked for Walter, Natalia Olbinski and Fausta Kingwe. Incredibly skillful, patient, conscientious designers who were working on the book as I was writing it. If you meet them, and I think they're in this chat, you must congratulate them, for it was Natalia and Fausta who sat side by side with Walter every day, who labored through every detail, caption, M dash, N dash, or is it a dash? Doing the invisible work as typographers do to make this book just right. So writing the text to format. So that's curious for a writer, any writer, I guess. So I was writing essentially to a layout as folks did pre-computer. Quartz is a digital news outlet, so we don't necessarily have a word cap. So this was new to me. And maybe some folks would find this frustrating, but I kind of learned to love this exercise. Sort of, I would write what I think was a good draft, and then it wouldn't fit in a column. How could I sort of like make this more concise? It was a training for what editors called killing your darlings, or sort of like killing sort of like neat turns of phrases and distilling to the pithiest nugget of a story. Around the time of Magmin, so my background, as Paul mentioned, is in design criticism and visual culture and communication. And around the time I got the call to work on Magmin, I had been mulling about going back to school, going back to journalism school. Working for a media startup was great. It was agile, creative place, but I was also longing for some kind of foundational course, a few mentors. And lo and behold, Walter introduced me to the pioneers, the living pioneers of new journalism. New journalism, for those who don't know, is a type of journalism sort of coined by Tom Wolfe and the like. They deployed literary techniques and inserted the writer right in the story. It was full first person. Reading it is hypnotic, theatrical, the prose incredible to read. And I thought it was an antidote to today's aggregation, you know, like so-and-so said to Reuters, so-and-so said to the New York Times. These reporters were witnesses. They were on the scene. It was incredible. And one memorable day, Gail Sheehy, the wife of Clay Felker, came to the offices, and she told me that for 3 weeks, she basically donned a prostitute's costume and worked from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. every day, and had basically hired a friend to pose as her pimp to get this story, Red Pants and Sugarman. She befriended operators of what's called Prose Hotels, doorman at the Waldorf, which was then an enclave for prostitution, to get the story. It was incredible and inspiring, actually, for sort of journalists now who sort of tend to work at home or sort of in an office away from a scene. One important direct lesson to me came from Gloria Steinem. So in my folly and in my delight with summarizing Radical Chic, Tom Wolfe's incredible essay about, it's a satirical essay about Leonard Bernstein's Party for the Black Panthers, I just sort of described this incredible scene. The reporting was so detailed that they even got the recipe for the hors d'oeuvres served in this party. So the original write-up sort of just relished in this sort of detail and incredible writing that Tom Wolfe basically takes you into this party. But Gloria reminded us that really there are two sides to, or more sides to every story. She encouraged us to sort of like consider a more, maybe a more balanced encapsulation. This is a historical record after all. Apparently after this article came out and a few from the New York Times, people stopped having functions altogether, charity functions, because it scared, I guess it scared people about like helping causes and for fear of being skewered by Tom Wolfe in New York Magazine. There were also days sleuthing in the New York Public Library for one credit. My favorite mystery is, where is Pierre Bonson? Pierre Bonson is an editor of Lire and collaborator of Bernard Pivot. But I guess Walter and Natalia had been trying to write to him. And it so happened that it was in Paris, and I just sort of like used whatever gumshoes, journalistic gumshoes I had, and like emailed a bunch of people, and lo and behold, I met him, and with chocolates, we met in a bistro, and he told me all about this episode that informed that write-up. One curious fact, maybe my favorite artifact from Walter's archive/office is this folder. Apparently, before computers, readers loved to send actual letters, and they were not shy about them. So, and somehow Walter or his secretary or someone had kept them all in a folder. So I'll show you one artifact. So this is around 1977, right, Walter? When you were redesigning Time. So Walter had then made
77, yes.
Made a big change on Time, and this letter came from Argentina. It was sort of a good letter, but it also had like essentially a thumbnail sketch telling the art director of Time how she would have done it better and how she could improve it. It's incredible. It's like pages and pages. And then this one thing, this sort of faxed, somebody paid, to fax Walter some critical mail. It says, change does not necessarily reflect progress. This reader thinks your new format stinks. J. Mooney. And there were lots of those, and many of those, reader feedback made it to our end papers, which we sort of memorialized there. But it was really, the book too isn't just a celebration of successes. What I really loved was like it includes things that failed. The back of the book, or even through the book, they tell you where things went awry. So back to Art is Work. Some days were long and tedious and just sort of sitting there trying to cobble a book together. But the sign on Milton's door had this miraculous shadow on the wall. When you enter, it's on one side, and when you leave, it's on the other side. To me, it was a poetic ending to each day, an affirmation for the daily grind. It says, art is work, there will be more work tomorrow. And I was thinking to regale the people who love like mastheads and letters in this listening in, I would like highlight a few aspects of the book that details that. But then again, why would I do that? Because Walter is here. So I thought I would switch to him. I'm gonna stop sharing and let him tell you all about it in person.
Thank you, Anne. I really appreciate what you said. It is true that when New York Magazine started in 1977, we were still working the way people did in, I don't know, certainly 1917. Type was ordered outside of the building. It came in galleys to be proofread and edited, and then went out, came back for reproduction in reproduction form, and then had to be pasted up. And when you ran out of time and there was still corrections to make, you had a little thin knife and some glue and or razor blade, and you cut very carefully a letter out and pasted another letter in. And if there was a word, for instance, that had a letter missing, you had to then cut every letter and separate them so you could fit in another letter. And typography at that time was a wonderful skill, but it was often done conservatively. I say that only because unless you were dealing with a big headline or had some other means to do it, you were setting type very carefully because you didn't have a chance to redo it so easily. And I must say that I do admire the wonderful typography that is done in many publications today, et cetera. Even though I think some of it is to excess, there are some really innovative things that can be done with tools that are much more flexible than we had. But I thought what I'd do today is take you through some type-related highlights from the book about New York Magazine, Time, and Fortune. Not concentrating on the stories of the magazine so much, but some of our encounters with the quirks of typography and the we would deal with. Now, I'm going to put on my screen share, I hope. Of course, this is the title of the book. One of the interesting things was that New York Magazine, even though it started in 1978, was really an offshoot of another magazine. And that was the World Journal Tribune's magazine called New York, which, by the way, in this case looks exactly the way it did in the Herald Tribune. This was art directed by a wonderful art director named Peter Palazzo. And he ingeniously, again, it's not easy to manipulate a weekly magazine in a newspaper setting. And he designed the entire magazine in Caslon. The logo itself is in Caslon, and all of, except for some sans serif, all of the other text and headlines were in Caslon. It was a beautifully elegant magazine. When New York started, and that's a picture of the first issue in 1968, we thought that the Herald Tribune was so successful, the Sunday magazine was so successful, that we would give the readers the same feeling. And so you can see there's a scene of New York City on the cover. Has nothing to do necessarily with the story inside. Small little blurbs at the top, and New York, kind of like the other one, it's a little more Bookman related than the Caslon here. But in any case, this was the first issue of New York Magazine. One of the mistakes we made was that the life of New York Magazine had to sustain itself on the newsstand. It was a weekly newsstand magazine, and we were charging 40 cents. That was a big change to anyone who got it free on Sundays. It was smaller, it wasn't as well printed, frankly, and it would cost you 40 cents. So we had to really rethink the nature of what New York Magazine began to look like. And one of the things we had to really think about was the logo. The logo has actually changed over the years. In 1963, Peter Palazzo designed this logo, which lasted until the Tribune folded. This was done again in Caslon. In April '68, we modified it into a kind of a Bookman Caslon, a Bookman swash, and gradually, as you can see here, made it slightly bigger. Sorry for that. It got bigger as and bolder. we certainly began to realize that the magazine needed the logo to be bigger and more assertive. In 1994, when Kurt Anderson became the editor of New York Magazine, he asked Michael Beirut, a wonderful type designer, to look at the logo again. And he reverted much back to the Peter Palazzo Caslon italic. So this, not exactly, but looks a lot like the original. When Adam Moss took over in 2004, he consulted several people, including Luke Heyman, the design director, Paula Scher, and other people. And that became a very lighter face, also based a little bit on a Caslon with a lot of modification. And while he made it lighter rather than bold, he also made it bigger. And as you know, New York Magazine practically goes side to side right off the page. But the logo itself, to a lot of people, hasn't changed because of the swashes that always were kept. The magazine kind of is recognizable in all of these different iterations. Another quirky thing about typefaces is that we set our type sitting in New York on 207 East 32nd Street in Philadelphia, which meant we had a contract with Curtis Publishing Company, who was printing the magazine and setting the type. That meant a messenger had to take a manuscript to Philadelphia, have it set in type, bring it back in galleys. We would edit it, editors would edit and proofread, give the galleys back to a messenger. He had to go to Philadelphia, get it corrected, bring it back, have it finalized, and then go back to Philadelphia to be set into slick reproduction galleys for us to paste up. So you can imagine how difficult that was and time consuming. One of our choices was a Times Roman typeface. One of the reasons we chose Times Roman is because it was one of the few faces that had an italic, a bold, and the regular, and that was one of the few serif faces that Curtis had. When we were looking for a headline face, Milton had originally designed New York Magazine with Times Roman bold. We needed something else, and our choices weren't much. They had some very good sans serif bolds. We chose Egyptian bold condensed and started to use it, I think, in the third or fourth issue or month of the magazine. And suddenly, Egyptian bold condensed became a hot typeface, and we got calls about how to get it and why we were using it and how they could use it. So these two choices were actually practical, mostly because we had a menu that was very shallow. And we didn't choose these, I'm sorry, because we loved every bit about these faces. We thought they were the most practical and the ones that Curtis could produce quickly. In any case, New York Magazine was not known for its innovative typography. We, again, had to rush to get a layout out every week. But we did have some special issues, one of them being the fall catalog, which was printed every September and gave readers a look at the upcoming fall season in culture. Every year I asked Seymour Quast to design the fall catalog. He had a little more time than a usual weekly because we knew that the issue was coming up. And always, because he was such a master of letter form, he loved typography, he loved old faces, he loved design. He was a wonderful graphic designer as well as an illustrator. So this is one of Seymour's, and I think it may have been his first. It says 1969, so it is one of his first fall catalogs, and he did 9 of them brilliantly. But New York Magazine did a lot of mistakes in terms of typography, and some of them on the cover that really cost us. We had a story about how to think about problems in New York City, how to think about them in a different direction. And one of the authors of this piece said, you know, you have to kind of turn the problem upside down and to think about it from a whole different perspective. Well, when Milton and I were trying to design a cover, it was very hard to come up with a quick concept about this guy's theory, which was flawed and complex. So we said, well, we've got to turn something upside down. Let's turn our logo upside down, which we did. Unfortunately, when we turned it upside down, it looked like a Russian magazine and nobody even recognized it. We also did a story about the new journalism. Here are both of those mistakes. The new journalism, we thought we'd be very clever and mimic the New York Times front page, or at least a generic newspaper front page. This is the first time since the first issue that New York's logo was so small. Because as you can see, even in the one on the left, upside down though it was rather big. This is another newsstand disaster. Nobody even recognized the magazine. We would get calls and people said, well, where is your issue this week? We had changed the look so drastically that people at a glance didn't notice. You know, New York Magazine was often known for just a square format under the logo. That square format was because we could not afford to do overprinting so easily. So we isolated, in some cases, a title and the visual under the logo. So there was a kind of a consistent look to New York Magazine that people just glanced at. These were such exceptions that people didn't even recognize them. Anyway, my next type of time. One of the things that the editors asked me to do immediately when I got there was to figure out what to do if they wanted to bill or display a second story on the cover. They call it the second billing. And that was usually done by a typographic line at the bottom of the illustration or of the portrait. They wanted to figure out how best in my new design could I deal with that. I kept thinking about what it meant to tell readers that there was something else inside besides what they were seeing on the cover. And I thought, I've got to find a way to give them a peek at the inside. And it occurred to me, because I had done something for the AIGA and Milton had done something for a corner, that I would do the same for Time. I would give them a peek at the inside by turning down the upper right-hand corner. That meant relettering the logo because I needed an E that was going to be readable at the same time that it was violated. And so the editors liked it, and we tried it for a few issues, and suddenly we found that not only did people like it, respond, and newsstand sales rose, but that it also became a kind of iconic look to Time magazine. So that was one of the few typographic achievements, not very innovative in type, but iconic look that editorial purpose. The other challenge at Time was how to give it a voice. Time magazine had a habit of using a typeface throughout the magazine, except when some editor said, let's jazz this up a little bit, and suddenly another story would have a funny headline. I found in a 70-line column, I would look through old magazines and find that some of them were 72 lines or 73 lines. And I realized when I got there and asked editors, designers about it, was that when the editors wanted the story to be longer, the designers had to do what they said. And so if a 70-line column was 73 lines, damn it, they were going to have to run the 73 lines. So when I redesigned the magazine, I decided that I would put rules around all the columns. Those rules could not be violated. You could not extend a 50-line column to be 51 lines. You could not extend a 70-line column to be 71 or 72 lines. We set the rules. And this was a way to take control of the design of the magazine, because the design of the magazine in 1977 was often in the hands of the editor, not the editor-in-chief, but mostly the editor in charge of the section. And they had many different tastes and many. You can see here the difference between the before and after. Again, that typeface on the left is some typeface that was not used in the magazine regularly, but somebody used it just for that. I decided that Time should have a voice. It should have a consistent voice, and not only a consistent look, but a typeface voice. And I chose Franklin Gothic at the time. Supposed to order a new typeface for the text, and that, oh, you're going to have someone design a Time typeface, and that'll be very important. And I decided that was the least important thing that Time needed. It needed art direction. It needed a consistent graphic look. It needed better covers. It needed more drama and size. We never had a large full-page picture. And the least of my concerns was the text face, which, by the way, turned out to be Times Roman at a 9/10, and it was perfectly fine, and I never changed it. One thing that I did change, however, was when I was asked to redo Fortune magazine in 1982. You may not know the history of Fortune, but it was 29. First issue was 1930. First issue is on the left. A beautiful magazine. It was a monthly. But for some reason, every art director, and there were great art directors, Leo Leone among them, kept changing the logo. If you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, when I got there, there were 9 different logos on Fortune, and they weren't even close to being the same. They were all different, and they were all based on whatever the art director wanted. He had a free rein. But I felt that when I got there in 1982, and you could see it at the bottom, that was kind of the iteration of the worst logo of all of them. So I decided that Fortune needed another number 10. And I wanted to design a logo that was very modern, having the fact that if you think of this as 1982, Steve Jobs was becoming well known. It was the time of the great technological innovations and revolutions. I wanted a logo that would be flexible, so I created Fortune as a Futura logo in a box, so that we could either change the color of the box, we could change the outline of the box, we could change the letter form color, and there would be much flexibility that would enable us to deal with any kind of photograph on the surface. But there was another problem at Fortune. Fortune was changing when I got there from a monthly magazine to a bi-weekly. That meant it came out every other week. And that meant it had to be newsier than it was previously. In the old magazine, in the monthly, writers wrote long stories. And as an editor said, they get to the point in about the 5th or 6th paragraph. In the new magazine, we had to have writers writing shorter, more frequently, and more on the news. So I devised a system, again, which had a lot of resistance but worked, that I would eliminate subheads. And you could see on the upper left, the shape of cars to come has a subhead. And then there's a long story. We decided that the subheads would go and the first paragraph of every story would be blown up to 14 on 18 point century-old style. And it would force writers to grab the reader's attention in the first paragraph. Writers, of course, resisted it, but it lasted for about 6 or 7 years and until the magazine got on its feet about being shorter and newsier. And this is a case in which the manipulation of design and typography affects how the editors actually worked with, understood the new format. However, some of the ideas of typography are funny and are fun to deal, more fun than this example of when we were invited to do upper and lower case. This doesn't exist anymore, but you all may remember this. Typographers, the International Typeface Corporation's wonderful publication. They gave different designers free range to design it. We did an issue on ephemera asking designers about their collections. And we decided that we would have a lot of fun with typography. One of the rules, by the way, if you designed one of these, is that you had to use ITC faces and you had to display as many of their faces as you could. We decided not only to show the collections, this I think on the right is a collection by Paul Davis of some of his ephemera, but we would ask all the designers and collectors to write a little bit about their collections. But what we decided to do also was to write every paragraph interlockingly, to ask the editors to make sure that every paragraph, every story started with the same initial, which means in this case an O. And we also put the bylines right over the text. And strangely enough, as you could see in this close-up, you could still read it. On the left is Stephen Doyle's story about his collection, and his name across the 3 lines of type still doesn't obscure the meaning. Same thing with Paul Davis, Bascoff, and Larry Samese. And of course, the typefaces in each story are different because they are all examples of various ITC typefaces. Doing these projects for ITC was a lot of fun. And the last page of every ITC upper and lower case magazine told the story about a letter form. And in this, Mirko illustrated the letter R, and we tell the story about the Phoenicians and the Romans and the Egyptians and the formation of the letter. And Mirko illustrated the 3 components, the stem, the bowl, and the tail that made up the letter R. Really beautifully done by him. The last slide I'm going to show you, and the last thing to talk about, is the most satisfying typographic design we ever did. Satisfying because we were asked to do something that was unusual, and that was to redesign the Fortune 500 issue, which had been done for, let's say, if it started in 30 and this was 97, as you could see, a good 50 years or so. In any case, Fortune 500 was a big selling issue and often just manipulated the number 500 in often very clever ways or bold ways or ordinary ways like putting 500 in gold or something like that. We had to figure out a new way of doing it. And the problem with with the number 500 is that you could only make it so big on a cover. You had 3 big equal size numerals. We decided to combine word and number and formed a Fortune 500 unlike any other Fortune 500 in the past 60 years. And it was, as we know, a bestseller every year because the Fortune 500 just sold well. But this one went through the roof and, to our surprise, ran for 10 years. In 1998, John Huey, who was the editor, decided, let's run it again. It was so successful. And when it became even more successful, he ran it in 99, and the last one was in 2007. So we were not only gratified that it lasted for 10 years, but a little dismayed that our fee was then divided by 10. So we probably got, oh, I don't know, $5 an issue or something like that. In any case, the Fortune 500, I think, typified our ability in typography at the time. It's sort of straightforwardly clever, not innovative very much, but it solved the idea of explanation and clarity. And I think it really worked for giving Fortune a new life to the Fortune 500. Thank you for listening to some typography tales. And Paul, I'll turn it over to you again if you want to ask a question or Anne wants to make a comment. Can you hear me?
Sorry, I had my mic off. Didn't want to interrupt you. So we have a few questions from our audience. Some have been answered already by your talk, but so if you had to art direct a magazine now, you know, it's your choice, which one would it be and why?
Or if I can amplify that question, which magazine needs it?
Right.
Well, you know, I must say that in the 70s, magazine design was growing, but I could have pointed out 50 magazines that I would have been glad to redesign because it was not the flourishing of art direction. There were some exceptionals when Henry Wolf did magazines and Otto Storch and many others. The Rolling Stone guys were doing wonderful jobs, but there are a lot of magazines that were ordinary. I must say that today, most magazines are really professionally well done. Whether they're a small magazine or a large magazine, they usually have and have learned to hire good art directors. Not everything is a great winner, but if you look at the ASME, American Society of Magazine Editors Awards, you will see some wonderful magazines, some magazines you've never heard of. And so I must say that I don't think that I'd be the kind of art director for magazines that I would have loved to do. Oh, I don't know, 30 years ago, I would have loved to do Sports Illustrated. I would have loved to do Esquire again. I would have loved, I mean, I wouldn't have touched Rolling Stone because I thought Rolling Stone, A, was wonderfully done, and I was not a student of music the way I was of sports or something else. So I really felt that I would not have fit well in that. I like news magazines. I like dealing with the news and illuminating that. But right now, I think I'm done with the competition of those kind of magazines. And I miss the fact that when we were doing magazines, we really got held to the fire about our newsstand sales and how the magazine was doing, because there was great competition. When we did Time, there was Newsweek and U.S. News, etc., and People and Sports Illustrated competing on the weekly front. Now you don't feel that because it's all online. So the pressure seems to me to be less. Now it's just about survival. In any case, I'm sorry I can't tell you what magazine I'd love to do.
That's fine. So you've met all types of editors and writers. Did you prefer a certain kind of relationship that made you do your best work?
We were very lucky. Both Clay Felker at New York and Ray Cave was my editor at Time, were open to argument, discussion, and they did not try to rule with an iron hand visually. They listened to what I wanted to do. I listened to what they wanted to do. You'd be surprised if you can get that kind of relationship with an editor, even though they are sometimes visually illiterate. They usually have some good ideas. Clay had a couple of great visual ideas that we used for cover, and so did Ray Cave. And so by establishing a relationship, and also the great thing about these editors was, whether they had a managing editor, an executive editor, and a senior editor, et cetera, they treated the art director as number two in terms of getting the magazine out. So they did not isolate the art director in any meetings. We were involved in everything. We were able to contribute editorial ideas and also to give our visual ideas and listen to other people. So once you have that relationship, you have a good relationship. And we also, later when Milton and I started our business, which changed a lot because we were only coming into a magazine for maybe 3 months to 6 months, sometimes a year, but not often, not as regular staff members. But we were always hired by not the art director, but by the owner or the editor-in-chief, and therefore our relationship was right at the top, and we could have a lot of authority. We worked with some great editors, John Huey, Ray Cave, Clay Felker, and I learned a lot of this from Harold Hayes at Esquire a long time ago. He was very, very involved in having the art department submit ideas and being on all the meetings.
Do you think that's the editor-in-chief's role, or do you think that's your role as a designer to maybe help foster that kind of community?
Well, when I got to Esquire, and I was Sam Antipit's assistant, Harold Hayes, first of all, these were small staffs, but Harold Hayes had the art department, and even me, who was not the art director, in a lot of meetings. We got to contribute, so we all felt like part of it, and that also continued to New York Magazine, especially in New York Magazine, where we were all in one big room anyway.
May I add that in writing, what made the book researching the book easier was, like, I learned that Walter is one of the most beloved figures in media. Basically, anyone we wrote to wrote us back almost immediately. The other thing that struck me was designers read articles sort of like keenly as maybe editors and writers would. Sometimes graphic designers tend to sort of like quickly skim articles, get the gist, but this was a time when Milton would tell us, like, sometimes they would even like suggest a headline, or sort of really have a handle on content. And it wasn't sort of this getawing of like form and prose. They were one and the same.
Do you think that's what separates maybe an art director from an editorial designer? Is it, or what kind of skills does an editorial designer have that's different from other types of art direction?
Is that for Walter?
Or you, Anne?
I guess the art director has this responsibility for the overall look of the magazine and all of the staff he's got, as well as the relationship with the editor. But he protects the editorial, he or she protects the editorial designers working for him and gives them the freedom to innovate on their own. And you know, either as their advocate or their disciplinarian or their critic. But I think when you're an editorial designer who is not in charge, you learn from both the top and the bottom, and that's how you learn how to move up.
Maybe I'll add a more general comment. I think maybe overall designers should try to read more. I mean, I know, maybe I don't mean with respect to everyone who reads. I worked as a graphic designer, and you know, the pace of work sometimes just requires you to sort of assimilate things quickly, but there's something to be gained in reading it yourself and chewing it over that generates sort of like ideas. Part of the book, if for keen readers, we include Milton's book list in there of things you ought to read. So find it.
One editor used to tell me he even didn't have time to read every manuscript, and he found himself reading the first 2 paragraphs and the last paragraph to get a sense of it. So that was a quick trick. We have questions from our...
Question for Anne. What did you learn that was surprising when you were researching or writing this book?
Every day was a surprise. Gosh. Honestly, it was humbling and surreal process. That more than ever, that like writing and putting things together sort of really coalesced. I'm not articulating that very well. Graphic design and journalism came together fully as one communications piece, even, you know, before computers came about. And that's so essential in how we produce content and present content. The words should deliver as the form. The other thing that surprised me was, or impressed me, was every issue of New York Magazine that Walter and Milton produced, to me, seemed like a miracle. Like, I don't know how that thing got produced from Monday to Thursday with train trips to Philadelphia, like sort of like X-Acto knives and glue and fumes and all that. That was surprising. And we take that process for granted now because we have all the tools.
So Walter, I know this is a difficult question. Do you think there's a future for print magazines?
Oh, I do, on a whole different scale than we've had before. I don't think anybody is going to do what TV Guide did, or Time, or others, you know, 6 million, 7 million copies a week. They're going to be smaller. And there are probably magazines starting every day. They're smaller. They're sometimes literary, sometimes poetic, sometimes single topic. You can no longer, I think, be a viable news magazine. I think we need things like The Atlantic, which is analysis, and magazines like The New Yorker. But I don't think that there will be national high circulation magazines anymore. There will be well-designed, well-edited, smaller magazines in the future, but I don't think we can stop the next generation from being online and getting their information that way, and some of their cultural satisfaction as well. And so the future is there, but it's not the same as there really was a golden age of magazines, probably from the beginning of the 20th century almost to the end of the 20th century.
I might recommend sort of like backwards. If you are looking for things to do while you're quarantining, read some back issues. They're incredibly informative and kind of a source of joy. Most of the New York Magazine archive is in Google Books, and it was sort of one resource, especially that like issue on smooching on the streets. You can start with that. Quite funny.
So Anne, do you think it's important to have online or print publications have like design criticism or journalism? Now that design is so pervasive, but you never really see it in more mainstream, like even the New York Times has cut its design and art criticism.
Design criticism is ever more important, I think. Well, I'm speaking from a biased purview. This is unrelated to magazines, but right now I think we're in the midst of a semester in industrial design where everyone is making stuff, masks like shields, partitions, and a design critic or someone might interject that we ought to, you know, have some caution with some ethical boundaries there. But back to magazines, the best critics of magazines are readers. The reader may, actually, if you start reading New York Magazine, start with like the reader's letters. They're wonderful and specific and insightful. And as compared to today's trolling, they are all in. They state their names, they state their argument fully, even a lesson and sort of like how to pose an argument. And maybe with that, before we completely end, I was just going to say, write to us. Like when you write a book, you hope it lands in the hands of a reader who might find some delight or information in it. Walter and I, or Milton, who's, by the way, Milton is currently in rehab, getting over, I think, a back issue, but for the first time, he's learning to draw on an iPad. But write to us. My email is just my name, annequito@gmail.com. And Walter, if I might give everyone your email, it's studio@walterbernarddesign.com.
Yeah, any answers we didn't cover today, we'll send to you, and we'll get you your answers on those questions, and we'll publish it on our website. So
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Carol.
thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Great.
It was fun.
Bye-bye.